Ladies and gentlemen, we said it once, we said it twice. The EFF is imploding. Let's actually look at and see what's actually happening. So Dali Mpofu left. For those of you who don't know who Dali Mpofu is, he's advocate Dali Mpofu. Even though he never seems to actually win any cases. He's the RET lawyer that they keep pulling out to defend Jacob Zuma and all the useless EFF rubbish that they lose cases on time and time again. If you recall, a lot of his arguments appear to be based on everyone's racist, you're all stupid, why don't you follow African custom, do what I say, shut up all of you, you're all useless, oh wait, I lost the case. It's pretty much his tried and tested arguments. Well, he was an EFF member. He's now left. He's joined the MK party, like everyone else. But before we go further in the story, if I can yet again remind you, please subscribe to the channel. It really does help. And if you want to support the work I do, look at the bags under my eyes. Buy me a coffee. It really will help. So the question on everybody's lips is, why didn't Dali Mpofu leave the EFF when Floyd Shivambu left the EFF? And according to the EFF, there is a logical reason for that. And that is, he wanted a headline moment. He wanted the headlines to read, Dali Mpofu leaves the EFF in big historic fashion, so that it could make the headlines. And it did make the headlines everywhere as breaking news. So, in many respects, the strategy worked. But there are those who are now questioning how many more will be leaving the EFF, because really, there's only really two main ones left. And that is Mr. Boy himself, Ndlozi, and the second is Zuma's favorite, Cole Niehaus. So a lot of people are asking, will Cole Niehaus leave? Now, Cole Niehorse, as Ramon used to call him, is rather famous because he spent a lot of time at Zuma's side. He was actually part of the MK party before it was a political party and then joined the EFF. When the EFF set itself up, many individuals asked the question, what was the likelihood that Niehaus would join the MK party over the EFF? Niehaus says he's been pretty stable with the EFF and he says he's pretty happy there. But the problem is, so did everyone else. They all said they were happy there. But they all left. Ultimately, you see, the problem is that Julius doesn't actually have many people left to call lieutenants. So the commander-in-chief is finding himself without an army because the army has deserted him. Now, this is very interesting because you may recall that one of the things that the EFF had previously said is that they were having difficulties with the Progressive Alliance because the Progressive Alliance seemed intent on killing it rather than the opposition, namely the ANC. Let us not forget that the reason the MK party was set up in the first place was to supposedly bring the ANC back to its RET roots, commie logic. But now the reality is that all the press releases and all the tension appears to constantly be on, ooh, look who we got from the EFF, aren't we great? Now this is actually leading on to some further very interesting headlines because the MK party Secretary General left the other day. And he left because apparently he was suggesting that all the MK party members, or the MPs, were all providing a form of kickback to Jacob Zuma's personal Capitec account. Now, the idea that a political party actually takes a tithe from its members, its deployees, isn't actually unusual. The EFF does it, and believe it or not, so does the DA. As I said, the idea that they have a tithe back to the mother party who deployed them in the first place isn't unusual. But in this instance, it actually isn't going to a political party funding account. In other words, the MK party's funding account is actually going to Jacob Zuma's personal bank account. Allegedly, according to some MPs that have asked for the Capitec account to be frozen. This would leave any individual logically asking the question of, is the MK party nothing more than Jacob Zuma's attempt to self-enrich and basically get a bigger paycheck or a bigger salary than he was getting from the taxpayer? Because according to some calculations, this may result in a kickback of just over $500,000 a month. Now you may say, well, why would Jacob Zuma do that? Well, if you recall, it wasn't that long ago that Jacob Zuma actually claimed that he didn't actually have that much money left, which he himself used the argument of, if you think about it logically, he was supposed to have captured the state, stolen all the cash, yet he's really, really poor. So the question was, where did all the money go? Did he actually steal it? And unfortunately, ladies and gentlemen, the answer remains unknown because nobody ever checks the accounts. And as you know, in South Africa, political elites are very rarely brought to account, especially when the political elite has a big following. But what can we actually take from this? Well, what we can actually take from this is that actually the Progressive Alliance was set up in direct retaliation to the ANC apparently embracing a supposed neoliberal agenda, which was being pursued, supposedly, by the Secretary General, Fikile Mbalula, and Cyril Ramaphosa. Now, those with a brain cell may say it's potentially that they are just liberalizing the market in a very, non-liberal sense in order to create more jobs. Because let us not forget that the reason the ANC lost power is because of the economic situation. Most people don't have jobs, and we've had high degrees of unemployment and load shedding. Many of their policies depend on government handouts, but you can't have a government handout when you've got no taxes. You can only tax citizens so far. At least we forget that there's like 8 million taxpayers in the country and like how many million people on grants? It's grossly outweighed. That eventually starts to cause you difficulty because you can't tax the shrinking tax base into oblivion, which is exactly what they've done. At some point in time, you actually have to grow the economy. And in order to grow the economy, well, you can't do the usual commie claptrap. You actually need to be a little bit more capitalistic and a little bit more liberal and less overbearing with your rules, which it would appear that the ANC under Cyril Ramaphosa and Fikile Mbalula are attempting to do. Now, Fikile Mbalula says that he is attempting to adopt the social democrat type model, which is actually not that dissimilar from the model that the now government of Botswana that they say they will be adopting. They say it is what they call third way socialism. So third way socialism is basically what they practice in Norway and Sweden and the Scandinavian countries. The idea being that the government is basically socialist, but the market is highly capitalistic, and that the idea is that you use the gains from the market in order to fund the socialistic programs of the actual state. It's not a terrible idea. It may work, it may not, but it depends on the market actually evolving and growing. If you have a growing industrial sector, it does give the government a lot more leeway in order to be able to grow things. But you see, the MK party and the EFF don't really represent that. What they represent is central command and overbearing control over the country. The usual Soviet Union type mentality. If you really want an example of it, think North Korea with an African bend. The problem inevitably becomes that the two parties should be aligning because they're not actually that popular when you get through to the popular mandate, if you actually look at the amount of people who voted for them. And so, like all coalitions of such parties, they need to become friends, not enemies. And that was the original idea behind the Progressive Alliance. But that's not what's happening. What we are truly seeing is in normal socialist fashions, many of the socialist parties are not set up to advocate an ideological agenda or for the benefit of the individuals. They're actually set up to self-enrich, which is the problem and the reason why most communist regimes ultimately collapse, because those at the top self-enrich while those at the bottom suffer in poverty. And this appears to be on display very, very quickly with these two parties, with the two parties actually vying for the space that they occupy, rather than joining forces in order to be able to push an ideological agenda. Now, there are those who argue that the only ideological person actually in the EFF and the MK party is actually Floyd Shivambu. So when Floyd Shivambu jumped ship from the EFF to the MK party, he took with him all his commie logic and his central pillars that the EFF has become so famous for. So I, for one, would say this. Julius, if you're listening, I know you're not, but if you are, maybe it's time to abandon some of the hardcore socialist rubbish and actually adopt a little bit of a capitalistic type bend. If you change your party just ever so slightly, you don't even have to change it drastically. But if you drop some of the communist rubbish, drop some of the racist rubbish, you may find yourself in actually a position where, having gone through this road to Damascus moment, you may find that the party actually grows and attracts parties from a wide variety of individuals. Let us not forget that the main reason the EFF is quite often not liked by the mass majority of individuals is that it comes across as full of hate. Drop that, drop the rhetoric, be a little bit more liberal with the economy, pursue your socialist type agendas to uplift social well-being, you may find that actually people like you. But in the current bend, with the hardcore commie rubbish and the hatred rhetoric, it's likely that all the individuals who really want to go full balls to the wall and actually really go full commie and full hatred will just keep jumping ship to the MK party. And as we've seen, Dali and Bofu, they're going to do it in the most deliberate fashion possible. They're going to keep trying to get the headlines. They're going to keep scoring points against the EFF. When it comes through to the local municipal elections, which are not that far now, the EFF will be nothing more than a footnote. So with that being said, one thing I would say to Fikile Mbalula, if you're watching, which again I know you're not, hold steady with the current ship, you're doing great, people are watching, and it is likely, when it gets through to the local elections, going to be rewarded and that people may return to the ANC. People don't necessarily have a problem with the ANC so per se. They have a problem with the corruption, the hatred, the race baiting, and the lack of economic mobility. Solve those, and the ANC gets everybody's support back. Let us not forget that during Thabo Mbeki's reign, where these things happened, the economy actually grew nearly into double digits. But again, that's just my thoughts. You can let me know what you think in the comment section below. Am I full of rubbish? You can let me know. On a final topic, I did pass comments around the situation in Mozambique this week in a video that I did. For those of you who haven't watched it, I will be linking it as the recommended video to this video today. During that video, I did say that it's likely that at some point in time we can have problems with the Mozambicans flooding to the border and trying to get into South Africa to avoid violence. Yeah, apparently I called that correct, because that's exactly what's happened. And so now the South African government's actually had to close the borders because they don't want all these people coming in here because of the violence. And the one thing I would say is that maybe, Mr. ANC, should have thought about that first before you did another Zimbabwe to Mozambique. Let us not forget that when Robert Mugabe was pursuing his plans, the ANC adopted the approach of silent diplomacy, which meant that we never spoke out against these things, which ultimately led to the collapse of Zimbabwe. And now we have how many Zimbabweans living here? Geez, the problem is it was highly predictable that this would happen with Mozambique. We congratulated the commie government for stealing the election. The citizens ultimately revolted. And now we got them on our front doorstep because they don't want to stay in their commie claptrap. The law of unintended consequences sure has a sense of irony. In any case, nice to know that I called that one correct. Anyway, until tomorrow, bye.